Gaius Octavius Caesar, the first emperor of Rome, was perhaps its greatest. The creator of the Pax Romana and founder of the Julio-Claudian dynasty was born in 63 BC and grew up in the shadow of his great-uncle, perhaps Rome's greatest general, the ambitious Julius Caesar. Caesar's successful exploits in Gaul and great ego made him a threat to the status quo, a powerful and influential yet corrupt Roman Senate. When they commanded Julius to give up his legions, he rebelled, invading Rome by crossing the Rubicon in 48 BC, when his young grandnephew was only 15. But his idolization of his uncle was already well underway and would be a continual facet of his own life, both a sincere devotion and a means for power. Meanwhile, his uncle, embarking on full insurrection and revolt, saw his enemies flee before him as he captured the Italian peninsula and seized Rome before heading to Greece and defeating the Senate's general, his arch-rival and former ally, Gaius Pompey, at the Battle of Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt, where Caesar pursued, eventually arriving to find Pompey murdered and beheaded by the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. Caesar soon overthrew him with the help of his voluptuous, enticing, and brilliant sister Cleopatra. She seduced Caesar and had a son, Caesarion, with him. With his rivals defeated, Caesar returned to Rome in glory, a powerful triumph, and the Senate under his feet, yet his hubris, vanity, and pure ambition would be his undoing. Convinced that he would make himself dictator for life, senators, even allies like Lucius Brutus, surrounded Caesar and stabbed him to death on the Ides of March in 44 BC. This devastated the young Octavian, who had come to see Caesar as his father, and whose idolization of him would be both a motivator for revenge and a launching pad for his own autocratic ambition. Octavian soon found an ally in a young general and devoted advocate of Caesar, Mark Antony. Antony was a brilliant leader, speaker, and general, and with a member of Caesar's family decrying the senators for their grisly assassination of Rome's greatest hero, Antony had the fodder he needed to pursue another civil war. Octavian, as he would do later on, also claimed that Julius's will had made him both son and heir to his throne. Teaming with Marcus Lepidus, another stalwart supporter of Caesar and a capable general, the second triumvirate, the first having been Caesar, the wealthy Marcus Crassus, and Pompey some 2 decades before, went for blood, purging Rome of the senators who had undermined and murdered Caesar and waging an all-out war on the rest. Like Pompey before him, the senators fled to Greece, where they were defeated at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. Octavius Caesar had skillfully avenged his great-uncle and adoptive father, and for the first of multiple times had used force and bloodline to legitimize his power. Rome was now under the thumb of the 3 young commanders, each able, each shrewd, and each teeming with ambition. They established a series of military dictatorships, Lepidus taking North Africa, Antony the East, and Octavius the West, with the mighty Roman army dominant in their legions on land, thundering horsepower, and tremendous triremes on the sea. They stood unchecked as the dominant power in the world. No one would challenge the legion's might or authority, and the triad's power seemed absolutely unbreakable, had it not been for 2 things: Octavius's unchecked lust for power and Cleopatra. The beautiful gem of the Nile had thoroughly seduced Antony, taking him away from his own wife, one Octavia, Octavian's sister, and the mother of Antony's children. This scandal, just as Caesar's marriage to her, brought shock. As Octavius unceremoniously pushed Lepidus out of power in North Africa, eventually buying him out, he produced yet another will, this one a possible forgery of Antony that promised his lands and wealth not to his Roman children, but to his growing number of offspring with the Egyptian temptress queen. Horrified, the Senate, still tremulous and fearful of both Octavian and Antony, condemned Antony and gave Octavian formal approval to supplant him. Yet again, Caesar had caused another civil war, and this one would be the most brutal yet. Octavian, a good leader and commander throughout his life, was nothing that his uncle or even Antony was on the battlefield. However, he was an excellent delegator of authority and administrator of power, and he knew to trust his best men, including Marcus Agrippa, the commander of his fleets. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Agrippa decimated the fleets of Antony and his Egyptian allies. Beaten and outnumbered, the combined Romo-Egyptian force fled back to Egypt, where they would face Octavian's land forces at the Battle of Alexandria a year later. With all of the momentum and power, Octavian was victorious, and the back of the Egyptians was broken. Antony, himself a broken and defeated man, committed suicide, while the issue of his beautiful and defiant Cleopatra remained. Octavius offered her and her son Caesarion life in exchange for being his prisoners and trophies. Not wanting to be on the wrong side of a triumph this time, devoid of her greatest love and lacking all power over everything except herself, Cleopatra chose suicide, by supposedly letting a poisonous asp bite her on the breast. Caesarion, Octavian's prisoner, would not last long. Their kinship as cousins and sons of Julius Caesar was not enough to keep ambition out of the way, and Octavian murdered the youth in 30 BC. The unquestioned ruler of Rome now found himself at the pinnacle of the world. Yet in his early 30s, and as bold and ambitious as ever, Octavian had learned from his great-uncle's mistakes and sought not to antagonize the Senate as a dictator, but to appeal to their sense of decency and humility by playing the role of a hesitant and unassuming ruler as he adopted for himself the title princeps, the first among equals, rather than dictator. The title, imperator, emperor, would come later, and as his glory grew, Rome stabilized, and more power was deferred on him as both consul and pontifex maximus. Octavian assumed more and more power, but always tactfully, humble. He dressed more as a commoner, lived in a simple house, and ate simple meals, deferring to the Senate on many occasions. The humility was very much political theater and was offset by his new name granted by the Senate, Augustus, the Exalted One. He also promoted the deification of his uncle Julius, and with himself as heir and son, it was not a little interesting that the ruler of the world at the birth of Jesus of Nazareth was also referred to as the Son of God. Artistic depictions presented him as such, exaggerating his youth and military prowess and depicting him as Apollo, another son of God. Meanwhile, his domestic and social policies of emperor complemented his ostensibly humble living conditions. He promoted traditional values, outlawed adultery, and provided tax incentives for the married and those with children. In doing so, not a little hypocritically, since he had married Livia, a cunning and treacherous widow against whom he had many dalliances, he set a social standard for producing balanced traditional society with higher birth rates, manpower, and stronger social ties in communities. He cracked down on the illicit behavior throughout the empire, banishing the poet Ovid for his sexual prose, while also encouraging the arts and other poets such as Virgil and Horace. Augustus showed himself to be cruel yet fair and effective when he banished his own daughter, Julia, for her illicit affairs and orgies, and her infidelity with Livia's son, his stepson, the future emperor Tiberius, who would be far from morally upright in his own reign. Despite the many economic concessions for families, Augustus ruled over a golden age in Roman fiscal policy. Indeed, his reign as the first Roman emperor is often considered to be the best, with few coming close to his financial, domestic, and military successes. Throughout his reign, Rome was prosperous due to its many forums and agoras, powerful and sanitary due to its strong infrastructure and refreshing aqueducts, safe, protected strongly by its vast legions, and full of extensive trading thanks to its many roads, which made the empire very, very wealthy. This is considered the beginning of the Pax Romana, a 2-century-long period of peace, prosperity, and relative stability where Rome's infrastructure, economy, and military were consistently strong and above reproach, and it was at the pinnacle with Augustus who set the groundwork for this as emperor, which is why it is often called the Pax Augusta as well. Rome was indeed large and powerful, more so than any empire before it in the ancient world. However, this did not stop the mighty legions of Augustus from expanding it, adding Egypt, Thrace, and Illyricum, modern-day Balkans, and northwestern Spain and Africa to his already vast empire. As previously noted, Augustus was a decent military leader, but an even better judge of character, relying on his many good generals, such as Agrippa, Tiberius, and later Gaius Germanicus, the grandson of Livia, to protect the frontier and expand the empire's borders on land and sea. They were ultimately very successful, yet the only major failing of Augustus's reign would set the tone for the empire's entire history. While attempting to conquer Germania and incorporate it into the empire, General Quintilicus Varus, vain and obdurate, was betrayed by the Germans, ambushed and routed, losing 5 legions and their eagles in 89 at the massacre of the Teutoburg Forest. Now old and shattered by this loss, Augustus would walk the halls often, demanding, "Varus, where are my legions?" Germanicus and Tiberius would clean up the mess, but Rome would never conquer the Germans, and Augustus, having ruled for nearly 40 years, would never recover. The question of his succession and the continuance of the empire loomed large, and palace intrigue and division gave way to many rumors and scandals. The Julio-Claudians would indeed continue, but so would the rumors and scandals, with many believing that Livia poisoned and killed off one rival after another so that Tiberius could claim Augustus's throne. Despite not trusting or admiring his stepson, Gaius Octavius gave in and named him his heir right before his death in 14 AD. He had ruled for 41 years and had turned Rome from a corrupt and dysfunctional republic into a powerful empire that was just getting started. But it is hard to argue that Rome, that would go on to have many great emperors and would continue for more than 4 centuries, had not reached its pinnacle with its first emperor.